I think we're good to go, Ron.
Okay. Well, Andrew Yang, good to see you. Good to see you, Jamani. Good to see you, Joanne, Reg. Thank you for being here. Uh, I'm going to kick it off and I'm going to hand it off to Andrew in a minute. But let me just begin by thanking my APA task force because many months ago last year, Assemblywoman Yulin Yu, the New York City Mayor's Office for the Prevention of Hate Crimes, we started hosting some of these panels to address the rise of hate crimes among Asian communities. I want to thank all the activists and organizers who have been working on this for months and promoting nothing but, as Joanne said earlier, solidarity and radical love between our communities. So thank you for all the work you do. And Andrew, thank you so much for providing your platform and the Yang Gang and all the people behind this to provide this space for some of these conversations. As we see it all around us on TV, social media, older Asian grandpas and grandmas getting kicked and punched in the face for no reason whatsoever. And you wonder why we see so much targeted crimes against Asians and Asian Americans all around the country these days. So, like, where is this all coming from? And I think we all have different views around where the hatred and violence comes from. And I hope we can have some honest, respectful, and productive conversations around race relations at tonight's panel. And we should absolutely push each other to be as uncomfortable as possible in these conversations. Most of us, and tonight, fought hard for stimulus checks, basic income, progressive taxes, and early on in this pandemic, because we recognized if people's basic needs are not met, we will see more violent behavior on the streets. I think it's easy to individualize violence. It's easy to just blame Trump and blame the young Black or brown teenager attacking an older Asian man. Put up a 25,000 bounty check to catch the attacker. That's the easy path. That's the knee-jerk reaction, is to respond with more violence. Most likely even state-sanctioned violence, and catch every one of those attackers, charge them, and make examples out of them to take a dominating stance. In my humble opinion, the harder path is trying to figure out where this violence against Asians are coming from and spend the necessary resources, time, and energy to have these conversations in uncomfortable settings and try our absolute best to lead with radical love and solidarity. Now, there's a big difference between making sure, if we see a violent attack, if you call 911, we have police officers to show up and handle the situation versus relying on the police to resolve the increase of violence against Asian Americans. That's my general take on approaching hatred and violence against Asians. And it's okay if you disagree. Again, let's just be honest tonight and have a good conversation. With that, let me hand it over to Andrew Yang.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you in particular over this last number of days for standing up for what you think is right for the families of New York State who've been looking for answers. We appreciate you so much. Also want to say thank you to the panelists who are here. New York City's public advocate, Jumani Williams. And Jumani, thank you so much. Your presence here is enormously meaningful, in large part because the Asian American community feels, frankly, somewhat invisible when it comes to some of these conversations. And having the elected leader who is actually standing up for the public, saying that violence against Asian Americans is an important public issue, it is just really, really awesome for so many. I would love to hear from you first, and then I'll introduce the other panelists in turn, just for your reaction to the rise in violence against Asian Americans over the last number of weeks and months.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and to all the panelists, and of course, Ron Kim. I've appreciated you not only the past few weeks, but a few years standing up and speaking truth to power in so many ways. And thanks for the invite. I believe it is important for me to be here. I've grown up in New York City. I've been around for a while, and I think it wouldn't be false to claim that very often the Asian community is viewed at and treated differently in so many ways, whether it's viewed as the model community, the model minority, when you're speaking especially of East Asians, or when you're talking about trying to solve some school problems and thinking that you can do that on the backs of communities without engaging them, or whether it is these types of hate crimes. I think there's a feeling that there's a community that you can kind of just ignore and walk around, or kind of just they're over there. And for me, it's important to say no, they're not. They're all of us, and we're all going to stand up when one person is hurting and make sure we have the backs, just like I expect every community to stand with every other community. And so I'm the public advocate for everyone. I speak a lot on these issues, and so it's important that we speak up on the increase in anti-Asian violence. And obviously, I think it's been there. It's gotten worse, and of course, we can't deny the existence of the number 45 in the White House, and needling it and pushing it and encouraging it, and the way he described the virus, the disgust that came from his words. And we know those words have reactions, and people will respond to them. And then, as Ron has said, there's a whole host of other issues that we can't ignore that leads to this type of ignorant behavior, from what somebody's going through, from the lack of acculturation, from the lack of basic needs not being met. People in society begin to act out. We have seen, when we try to respond simply and only with law enforcement, that it doesn't really work, and it creates a whole nother host of issues. With that said, I am one who will say that there is a role and a place for law enforcement in these issues. The problem is when we think that we solely rely on them, or we think they're the largest part of this issue. It's just not going to work. And so if we're going to talk, we have to talk about, well, of course, when we call law enforcement, we want them to respond. We want them to respond equitably. We want them to do the job that they were hired to do. And the Asian community has a right to ask for and want to see accountability for people who do these things. But what we want to see is that these actions stop. We know simply just throwing law enforcement, simple arrest, is not going to make the action stop. And so we have to invest in community. We have to invest in redoing many of the things that occurred over the past 4 years, and especially during this pandemic, because people, I think, have to better understand the culture, better understand all New Yorkers. And people often say that that's a soft on crime approach, but it's really not. It's a really hard on crime approach. Because we know what actually can move these issues forward, and we shouldn't be running to our sides and screaming. One group is screaming, "Oh, we just have to arrest," and then police, and the other group screaming something else. No, let's come and talk about it. Let's see what has worked in the past, and let that be our guide.
Thank you, Jumani. I think so many people agree with you that you don't want to just have one emotional reaction and have people pulling in different directions. We do have to come together and try to be constructive and productive. So, Joanne, you are the executive director of the Asian American Federation, which is something of an umbrella organization for a whole host of nonprofits that touch the Asian American community. One of the issues around this problem is trying to get a sense of its magnitude. So the number that's out there right now is that there has been a 900% increase in reported anti-Asian crimes year over year over this past period, which is obviously a shocking, stunning number. But one of the things that I believe most of us realize is that a lot of these incidents are not being reported. And speaking for myself as an individual, like it feels like when you happen to have a video of an event, then or it's serious enough where it makes the news, which would often have accompanying pictures, that then it hits the popular consciousness. So what I'd love to ask you is, you're in touch with all these organizations. What has the data been in terms of like the impressions you get either from personal conversations or organizational reporting? And to the extent that these incidents are going unreported, which I sense is the case in a significant proportion of victims, is there something that can be done to actually build trust so that we actually have an accurate sense of how many violent incidents are occurring to Asian Americans in New York City?
Sure, that was a lot there, Andrew. I can talk for an hour now. Let me just answer that in an hour. But thank you for inviting me, and it's great to see Ron and Reg and one of my favorite elected officials in New York City, Jumaane Williams. Everything Jumaane has said is absolutely right. There is a place for law enforcement. When there's an axe murderer coming through your door, you're going to want to call the police, right? And there's a place for that. But right now, what the community is feeling is a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, and the word that you used was reported, and that's absolutely right. It is. The reported ones are the folks who are feeling comfortable enough to tell their story, but there are many, many, many more we know. And a lot of the nonprofit organizations who anchor our neighborhoods are actually collecting those stories and saying to us, they need to, the community's going out to them and saying, this is what happened. There are long lists of what people are saying. And for whatever reason, people are not talking about it. I will tell you, I've gotten calls from people, strangers. They'll call me, and I always want to pick up the phone because I know that they need to share their stories with somebody. And I've also been, I've gone out in my neighborhood and I've had people say things to me. I know Ron talked about the Black, Asian, that's the setup. I totally disavow that. I don't know what that is. I think a lot of media sensationalize that, but I tell people all the time, first two people stood up for the Asian community, Tish James and Jumaane Williams, right? And so these are community, in New York City, we really do have, we can always do better, but I know who our allies are and I know who stands with me. And so I'm deeply appreciative of the Black community. Reverend Sharpton, yesterday said, we're going to need to have some conversations about the race relations in the city, but we can't go out and let people be hurt. And I think that's a conversation that needs to happen regularly. What is happening, I think, exactly what Jumaane said, the model minority myth, right? Like, we are set up under the structural racism to fail and to, we're the buffer between, blacks and Latinos and the establishment. And so, of course, we're going to be, targeted. We are told that we're going to succeed without any help from government, right? But then there's the other side where we're always seen as a perpetual minority, right? Everybody always says, where are you from? Where are you really from? So I've been telling people, you need to pick your racist trope at this point, right? I'm one or the other. You can't pigeonhole me in both. But I think the invisibility is a very real thing. What we're talking about is, this has been happening to our community since January, right? When the news broke that something was happening in China in January, I remember where I was. I was visiting my sister in Massachusetts, and I said, oh my God, here we go, right? And so we have a reporting site where we've translated into 5 different languages so people can tell us their stories. We have engaged City Hall, we've engaged different leaders. We need to stay on top of this. What I'm asking for, there are a couple of asks I do have. What I'm asking for is, we talk so much, there's so many theories, sociologists, so many, criminal justice reform, all of these theories. Right now for me, I want to be able to figure out how do we center the victims, right? They're going to need a lot of help. There's a lot of trauma. How do we figure out a system that really centers them to make sure that they get the help that they need? Because there are people where, I've sat in the rooms where the victims tell their stories, and I've cried publicly because it's really painful, and because they're immigrants and they look like us, and there are fathers and our grandfathers and our moms. They're going to work because they have to, right? They're low-income workers and they have to go, and they're getting targeted. And so, my ask is, one, we all need to center the victims. We need to figure out, how do we help them? We need to set up a system that really centers getting them the help they need. If they can't go to work, how are they going to survive? If they need to go get some, mental health assistance, in language mental health assistance, how do we do that? But the other conversation we need to, that's my, primary ask, I guess, in all of this. But also we need to think about, I know that CAE had programs with other nonprofits throughout the city that really help to build community, to create community. And those are model programs that are being sacrificed because of funding cuts. What we prioritize as a city speaks volumes about us, right? So I know that we talk, CAE and the Federation were talking when we needed help. We went to them and they said, here's how you figure out how to do bystander training, safety videos. But ultimately, when all of this is, when we start to, critical mass vaccination, we do need to have these conversations because we cannot emerge out of COVID into the same world that we entered into. The communities of color are constantly marginalized. There aren't enough resources to go around. My God, we talk about the communities of color nonprofit hustle. We are hustling for dollars to serve our community. And so we need to figure out, how do we get more resources for ourselves? How do we recognize all the frontline nonprofits doing the work, communities of color? How do we get people vaccinated from our communities? I mean, it is just, the list is endless, but, we need to figure out how do we get out of this and walk into a different society where we value the people who are doing the hard work to keep all of us alive. And so that was a long answer to a.
No, it was great, Joanne. It was very substantive. And one thing I loved about it is that it seems like you and Ron are on the same page in a particular way, which is when there have been these incidents that are reported online, there have been people that have said, hey, let's catch this perpetrator, which I believe we need to do. And I do believe that we should be prosecuting some of these assailants for hate crimes, which does not seem to have happened in this latest case. But it sounds like both you and Ron are saying, hey, instead of just paying attention to the perpetrator, we should be paying attention to the victim. Mm-hmm. Like, that the victim may be traumatized, the victim may not be able to work for a while. And I think that's a sentiment that a lot of people would agree with. Reg, I'm going to come to you, and you and I spoke earlier about how you've had like a massive surge in requests for the work that you all do at the Center for Anti-Violence Education, which you can imagine there being a massive need for that. And as Joanne referenced, that right now your ability to deliver those services doesn't match up to the demand that you're seeing, particularly now. I just want to comment briefly on, I think there's one case that most of us are well aware of because it was so recent. It was the middle-aged woman in Flushing who was shoved to the ground and had a number of stitches on her head. It could have been worse. The assailant was arrested the next day and then released, not charged with a hate crime, despite the fact that it seems like he clearly used racial epithets like prior to shoving the woman down. And I am very, very, I don't know about the rest of you, but like I feel like the fact that she was an Asian woman was integral to the fact that this assault happened, which in my mind would warrant it being a hate crime. And I think that New York City should make very, very clear that there is no place for hatred or any form of racist violence in New York, and that if it does occur and we know it occurred, then we should be treating it very, very seriously as a hate crime. So, Reg, what you do, what your organization does sounds incredible, where you actually train people, and you say that instead of calling them bystanders, we should call them upstanders, in part because we want them to take a more active role in this situation. So can you describe what your organization, the Center for Anti-Violence Education, does, and then how it would go about trying to strengthen a community or a group, either before the fact or after the fact?
Yeah, thank you for putting this event together. First of all, to answer your question, so the Center for Anti-Violence Education, or CAE, we serve the needs of the most marginalized who are disproportionately affected by violence, various types of violence, which includes hate-based violence. And so we do this through training, workshops, and we serve adults and young people. And the specific types of training that we offer are de-escalation trainings, empowerment self-defense trainings, as well as what you mentioned, upstander trainings. And upstander is just a fancy way of saying active bystander. So we want to be able to invite people to utilize tools and strategies that feel safe for them at various points in in which they witnessed that incident to intervene, right? So it's not telling people you got to intervene and interrupt all the time. That we provide various types of tools and strategies that make sense for the person's safety or the situation, so that it's ultimately the goal is to center the need of the person being harmed. Whether that means we use a strategy called distraction, where we distract the harasser just so that we can allow the person being harmed to get away safely, right? So that when we're distracting, we're not intentionally trying to escalate the conflict that might perhaps happen, right? So the distraction could potentially look like, randomly going up to the person or physically, right, like getting in the way by accident, looking like, oh, I don't know where I'm going, what's the time, right? There's various types of examples and tools that we'll go over in our workshops, and we'll do this through small group breakout. And so it's ultimately, these workshops are made with the mindset that we want to generate community-based solutions, right? We know that there's place and time for law enforcement to come in, and unfortunately for a lot of the communities that we serve, calling the police have not always felt safe, nor is it safe, right? So we serve a lot of LGBTQ folks. We serve survivors of domestic violence, sexual violence. We serve people of that are just generally gender-based violence, and oftentimes they have had very negative experience. And so, as an organization, as a community, we have to think about other ways to support, and also not just support the victim per se, but each other, right? Because the healing doesn't just come from us going to a therapy session. It also comes from the community. When we can share our experiences, when we don't have to do this alone, those are all the ways in which we heal from those, negative conflict, violence, and etc. So the workshop space, we're really big on setting up these spaces from a trauma-informed lens, and so it's not a lecture, it's not a webinar. So I really would encourage folks, if you are interested, to check out our website. We do offer free community workshops for New York City residents and et cetera. So, again, I want to also echo other panelists saying that this is not new. I actually experienced a level of harassment right outside my door, in Queens last April. And I knew that this was going to happen. I just knew, but I was surprised at how fast it was happening. And something that we haven't really talked about a lot is, once the schools start opening up, we have to think about the safety of our children, right? Like, kids are just they can get really brutal, right? I mean, it's horrible to see our elders, older people being physically, verbally assaulted. But this is, once schools open, this is going to be a whole nother layer of issue that we're going to have to revisit again and again. So
that's a great point.
Yeah. So with that in mind, I also want to do a quick plug. We do have a couple of youth programs as well, because it is important for young people to understand systemic oppressions, that these lateral hostility, these lateral violence that happen between people of color, if we can understand why that pent up frustration, right? Hurt people hurt people, right? Hurt people hurt people. So if we can understand that sort of systemic ways of our society, especially from the young age, and that's what our youth program does, it can really change the next generation, right? So I said a lot, but I don't know if that answers your question, but I'll leave it right there.
That was tremendous, Reg. I think people got a sense of your organization's work. One thing that you didn't include, which I think is important, is that you all have massive demand for your services, and you only have a team of, 5 or 6 people.
Yep.
So there's an imbalance between your ability to deliver these services and the need. I mean, you can imagine there being a crushing need. When I think of these incidents, I do think about elderly Asian Americans that are, like my parents' age, getting brutally shoved to the ground. But I agree with you that schools will be a whole nother environment, and there a lot of people are afraid, and so and schools tend to be some of um, the least controlled environments, I think, because you're with so many young people who, in many cases, are still figuring things out. So Ron, I'd love to hear from you. So Ron, you famously literally like tackled a mugger once, where there was like you witnessed a crime and then you actually intervened physically. I think Reg is right that that's not like a normal standard. That a lot of the times you'd find some way to somehow distract or interfere in a way that doesn't require like that level of personal risk. I talked to someone yesterday. I mean, we talk to people every day. Like a lot of people on this panel are Asian American. We've all felt this surge of hostility and animosity since, Joanne said last January, which is about right. I think for me, it was more in February or so. Like we've all experienced it in our own lives directly. A young person actually said to me yesterday that he was like afraid to leave his house, which is related to what Reg is saying, where it's like, imagine these kids going back to school, where there's like this real sense of fear and anxiety among many Asian Americans because of this sense that when you go in public, like people like glare at you in a particular way, or like you can kind of sense like people's like hackles rising, that there is that sense that many people in our community feel. Like what kind of advice or guidance would you suggest, Ron, when you're talking to an Asian American teenager who's struggling with these feelings of insecurity in their own city, in their own neighborhood?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I think you covered quite a bit over there. And I mean, I'm just going to go back for a couple of points and circle back to you in a minute. But I think there's this rising tension among young Asian Americans, and I see it on the ground, where they're trying to organize and respond to the violence with more dominating personalities. Like, I'm also tough. Like, don't disrespect me. Like, you can't burn me all. Like, that's like the sentiment that's taking over a lot of Asian American young people, especially Asian men who are dealing with, as many understand, identity issues as well as the rise of violence. And I think it's very important to recognize, what they're going through, but also have some tough conversations. You can't respond to violence with more violence. I think we're in a unique situation. And you mentioned the mugging incident, and most people talk about how I stopped the mugger 2015, but they never really talk about what we did with the perpetrator following it. We intervened at the courts because he was being recycled in Rikers Island over and over. He was arrested about a dozen times in 1 year with mental health problems, but he kept getting arrested and putting back in prison. It takes a lot to actually provide wraparound services with people who are inflicting pain on others. It takes a lot to connect those dots and intervene and help them in a meaningful way. Yes, we should be listening to the victims. We should give them justice and we should give them a lot of voice, but we also need to connect the dots on where the violence is coming from. And it's easy, again, to individualize it and say, well, these people hate Asians, so let's just send more police down there and then we'll figure it out. We'll figure out the rest next. That's not the approach we should be taking. We need to figure out how to improve the social conditions around everyone. And that's the hardest part. That's why we fight so hard to raise revenues and invest in our people. That's how we get out of this together. And that's why I think as Asian American leaders, we show up not just for our community. We show up when school districts and Black and brown communities are being cut through austerity budgets for 15 years. They're still old. And Jumani's been at the front of this fight for years with all of us. We still owe, what was it, $4 billion from the Campaign for Fiscal Equity for 12 years that we haven't been able to collect. It shouldn't be just Black and brown leaders when we have those fights. It matters when Asian American leaders all should show up and hold hand in hand, talk about education funding, social funding, healthcare, and make sure every human basic needs are met. And that's why, Andrew, I think you have a powerful platform, because you try to address these in strategic ways through anti-poverty approach, and making sure people have cash in their pockets. And I promise you, people have an extra $1,000 in their pockets to spend on local, you will see violence decrease everywhere. A lot of this has to do with scarcity and people being pitted against each other. And that's a much harder thing to resolve. So I'm glad that you're not shying away from it, Andrew, and willing to have those tough conversations to get the policies right.
Well, I think this event, this assault in Flushing just the other day, is really like a great emblem in its own way, because you can kind of see in that, one of the things I've said to my friends or staff, I think people's executive functioning right now is lower than it would be in any other time, because a lot of people are struggling with not being able to work. Even if they are working, they're doing it via Zoom in a disembodied way. Like, a lot of our customary social lives have been disrupted. We haven't seen family members. Many New Yorkers have lost family members in different ways. There's so much pain. And in this environment, then when in a different time, a better time, if you feel this moment of frustration with this person in front of you, you would just let it go. But today, you actually don't have the capacity to override some of your terrible impulses, and then you act on it in that moment. And then that's what we're seeing playing out, like with that assault in Queens, where the person was behind them in line, and it would have been a moment of frustration if the person had been reacting in a more positive way, but instead they reacted with hatred and violence in a way that injured someone. And so to me, the question is, to your point, Ron, how do we actually try to restore that sense of both humanity and self-control in hundreds of thousands or millions of people that right now are struggling? I think what Reg said was hurt people hurt people. And right now there are just so many people that are hurting, that the pain is spreading in many ways. So Jumani, again, we're so grateful for your being here. I think one of the things so you commented before that you agreed that Asian Americans are something of an invisible community sometimes, if you were going to pick one community that sometimes gets overlooked. And there is this image of us as the model minority. There was at least one study that showed that Asian Americans have a very high poverty rate in New York City. At least the study I saw said 24% or more, which was one of the highest in the city, maybe even the highest. Number one, what do you think that we can do? Because you've been fighting for the public in so many ways, big or small, for years, and we appreciate the heck out of you for it. What do you think that we can do that actually can improve people's ability to react to a stressful situation in a way that's positive and not corrosive or even violent? And number two, do you think that there is something that Asian American activists, like the people here in this room, can do to highlight the real needs and struggles in the Asian American community to a higher degree, if you think that's a need?
Yeah, I think what sometimes folks will try to do is get into oppression Olympics, and that's a terrible game. And so, we have to, try not to play the oppression Olympics. I think everybody, when honest, we know, and we always have to be clear what anti-Blackness has meant in this country, and that we know that the systems of bigotry hit communities differently. So we have to be honest about that. And I never want to take that away, what anti-Black racism has been ingrained in this country, what that means. But of course, it doesn't mean that bigotry is not hitting other societies and other communities. And we have to be real about that. And I think people will be shocked to learn how much of the Asian community is in poverty and what that means for them and how that's impacting them. And we all just need to be there to kind of lift up those voices. And very often what happens is that because we have made the things that people need to subsist so scarce, is that we're all just trying to fight for a piece of the pie. And as we know, we should be looking up, because there are people who actually have the whole pie, and they keep sprinkling some crumbs down that we have to fight over. And one of the things, just to go back a little bit, I saw a report. We're always, speaking about we have to uplift the victim. But I saw a report where victims of crimes, most often, the number one thing that they want is information about the case, and for this not to happen to anyone else. And usually when people who are involved in law enforcement and DA will translate what victims want is to just a punitive measure, just lock this person or just that, but it's really not the case. And more often than not, the two things that they want, they never really get. You'll hear people complain that they're not getting information from the police, they're not getting information about their case, and nothing is really being done to try to prevent it from happening again. And so what people will be pushing is, okay, if we can get this guy off the street, then that will be the end of it. But we know that's not the case. And as Ron was saying, the more difficult conversation is, how do we make sure it doesn't happen again? The more difficult conversation right now is, what is public safety? And how do we keep people safe? How do we keep people safe and actually make people feel safe? And I want to be clear, sometimes people who don't feel safe can be even worse than people who are actually safe. And so that's a whole nother conversation, but we really have to dig into that. And we have to have people that have the courage to dig into that, because it's very easy when things that happen. Oh, we sent police. Okay, now we're done. The police is going to solve the problem. And that's it. But it rarely does. And it's hard to, unpack that, to say, look, law enforcement has a role to play. We just can't have them play all roles. And so what are the other roles that need to be played? Are they resourced? Are they well thought out? Why are people feeling this way about our Asian brothers and sisters? Why are people feeling this way about LGBTQ family? Like, what we have to figure out, what is the issue here, and then try to address that. And if we don't, we're not going to solve the problem. We're going to keep going through these cycles and then start fighting each other. As you mentioned, hurt people. So I think what it is it's great for us to be, everyone to kind of organize their communities, but for everyone to get in the same room. And what I like about this is there's a recognition that, police sometimes represent one thing for one community, but a whole other thing for another community. And we don't want to provide a response that can make people feel a way, whether they're safer or not, but then we know it's going to have a very bad response to other communities. And so what we need to do is all get in a room and figure this out, like these calls, like these conversations. And what I like here is, I think there's an understanding that we need to have more than just that police presence. And quite frankly, if your definition of safety is having a police officer in every corner, that probably means you're not in a safe space. So we really have to figure out, what is the definition of safe for everyone? What is the definition that makes a community safe? Why are people lashing out at our Asian brothers and sisters? And then we have to work on that. But that takes courage. It takes resources, and it takes all communities to have that conversation. So there's definitely parts for us to play. But I don't want people to get lost, because sometimes when people hear things that, like what I'm saying expressed by Ron, or Joanna, or Reg, they really believe it. We're making excuses for people. There is no excuse for pushing down an Asian woman on the ground. There's just no excuse for that. We're not excusing this behavior. There has to be accountability for that behavior, but we want to make sure that behavior stops for that person and for other people in the community. And a side note, the biggest mental health facility in this country is actually Rikers Island. And that right there should show you why this recycling happens over and over, because we're not really addressing the problem.
Thank you, Jumani. That's awesome that you can identify what it is that victims care most about, which is information about their case, and then the sense that it's not going to happen again to either them or other people in the community. I will say about this case in Queens, like, you get the sense that the assailant got off light. And there is like a question mark in my mind as to whether it would be realistic or desirable or something that the victim would have an interest in, to actually have him go to the woman that he shoved to the ground and apologize and say, I am so sorry. I never meant to injure you. That is not who I am. I did not have the sense of like racism or xenophobia. And I'm so sorry if like you felt like this happened because you're Asian. Like I don't know if other people would have an interest in like, or whether the victim. I mean, it would be up to the victim. Like the victim may never want to see this person again, and like may want to forget about their existence.
Restorative justice is a very real thing, and it actually works. It does take both to agree, but it is agreed upon more often than people think, and it also works for violent crimes as well. That assailant may actually have some bigoted and prejudiced thoughts. Like that's a real possibility because we all have it. So I don't want to dismiss that.
Yes.
But restorative justice can address that as well. It was a very conflicting moment when Amy Cooper, who called a state-sanctioned violence on that black man,
yeah.
You were conflicted because the first person who gets it is Amy Cooper. So I don't know what that means. And sometimes you may need a little bit more on top of that as well. But we do want to push the model of restorative justice, and which includes in kind of accountability to that as well. And it's not soft. What it is, man, you can slap that person with a fine. You can put that person in for 30 days, six months, and nothing has been learned, and nothing has changed about the person's behavior. The person may come out even angrier that they were put in to begin with. And so we have to have the courage to say that the models that we have been using have not worked. So we don't want to return to normal because normal didn't work. And we have an opportunity right now to lay in systems that are new, that we know work, that are data-driven, that we know work from experience. But we have to have the ability to say, this is how you really get tough on crime. You put in situations that can really stop it from happening.
Well, I think that this is to your earlier point and Ron's point, which is if you're trying to prevent this, you have this fantasy that, if there were police officers everywhere, then somehow it wouldn't happen. But that is not realistic. I mean, she was literally in line in Flushing, and this person had this reaction. Like, you can't have a police officer stationed at every retail establishment. So you do have to think about measures that would work beyond police, and also give victims reassurance that this will not happen again, certainly not from this person. To your point, Jumani, if you just have this punishment, then you're not sure whether or not that person is in a place afterwards where they're not going to be a threat to anyone else. Particularly given that, as you commented, that we're often not treating people when they wind up in our systems at all. And then you talked about Rikers recycling people over and over again. So I'm glad that at least there may be some potential there around a different approach that's a little bit bigger than saying like police will keep us safe, because I agree we have to think bigger than that. Like I do not think that's like, I think there's a place for police in this, and certainly there's a place for police when you've identified someone who's committed a crime, but police cannot be our sole approach, or else it's not going to work. I don't know about the rest of you, but like I feel uplifted and invigorated from this conversation. I mean, it's a very difficult topic, but you all are doing such incredible work. I'd love to go around and have each of you share like a 2 to 3 minute closing thought, including, most importantly, an ask for the people who are viewing this online, if there's something, because there's so many people who are here who are in pain, who want to take action, who want to do something. If you had an ask for someone who's watching this right now, and it could be your organization, it could be some kind of training, in your case, Reg, like if there's something that you'd ask someone to participate in, what would it be? Would love to start with, sorry, Jumani?
Yeah, because I have to jump, so I'm sorry if I can just go.
Yeah, you go ahead first, Jumani. Really appreciate your being here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I didn't want to leave without lifting up the name of Christian Hall, who was an Asian young man who was shot and got killed by police in Pennsylvania. We got to make sure we lift him up, lift his family, and get justice for him. The one thing, there's always hope. I end with there's hope for everyone. We came in here to life with a system of kind of bigotry, unfortunately, but we didn't create it. our job is to just get a better system for the people come after us. And we can do that 100%. The one thing I always leave folks with is there's probably in every community, every time people go to work and come home, there might be a group of young people that you kind of see hanging out. You don't engage with, you don't say hello, you don't say good morning. And invisible people actually act invisible. And so I want to ask is usually that adults, just, begin to say good morning to those folks. It's going to be a little, when we come back from pandemic, you may not see as much, but it's going to be, they'll look at you a little strange at first because nobody engages with them. But once you get started, I think you'll see how much of a big difference it can be. So wishing everyone peace and blessings, love and light. Thank you for inviting me to this space. And I know we have a lot more work to do.
Thank you so much, Jumani. Let's give him a round of applause. He steps away. Appreciate all you do for the people of New York City and appreciate your being here tonight a great deal. I love the suggestion of just saying hello to folks that you are seeing that might not get that kind of acknowledgement, because they're just cleaning the stoop or they're trying to make ends meet in whatever way. We all know, we see people all the time in New York City that we don't acknowledge on that level. And I think it would make a tremendous difference. I'll really take Imani's suggestion to heart. I think it would, a lot of those people also happen to be, a different race than you. And so I think that that's something that you can contribute very directly and personally and immediately. So Joanne, you do awesome work for so many of us, and representing so many Asian American organizations. Would love to have your closing thoughts and then any ask or suggestion for the attendees.
Sure. I really appreciated everything Jumani had to say, because I think those are exactly what we're thinking about, right? And for all of us, we think about at the Federation, we think about what policies that we need to put out there for all of our entire Pan-Asian community. We've seen this before with, after 9/11 with our South Asian, Muslim, Arab family members, right? Like they were targeted. And so we've seen this, we've seen what happens out of that playbook, right? And so this is a second go around. I hope that we are able to galvanize resources so that this doesn't happen to any other community. I appreciate what Ron said about building a broad community. We can't only stand up for Asian issues, right? Everybody's all the Asians are outraged because Asians are getting beat up. And it was like, there's horrible things happening in our city all the time to other people, and we need to be able to pay attention and stand up. What is right and what is wrong. My ask is, what I have been asking since last year was communities, language, the two things we always talk about, language access, cultural competency, right? That's always top of mind for me all the time. People need to know what their rights are. And, what Jumani said, people need to know, how do they get follow-up, right? How do they get information? How do they get to know? How do you report things? My God, we can't have our entire city, everything in our city happen to go through 311. That is not an answer, right? So we need to have some better systems where people know of their rights, know what they need to do in certain situations. And we need to have people who need to, and people who can respond in a culturally relevant manner, right? We have immigrants, 70% of our community, Asian American community, were immigrants. We need to be able to have people who are sensitive to that. Having a vast immigrant community, we also come from cultures and countries where, interaction with police is not good. Interaction with law enforcement is scary. We need to recognize what that looks like, and to be able to really help our communities to be able to report crimes, but also to know their rights. We also need funding. It's the city budget season right now. A lot of people, a lot of things are getting cut under, COVID. We don't have money for the city. There's not enough revenues. But I think we need to figure out, what is it that we value as a city? What do we keep, and what do we, what will we uphold, and what needs to be in place to be able to help our city come out of COVID and to heal. And I also want to, I appreciate this conversation about building small networks, right? I know CAE has done that work, but look at the small business community. My God, they've been devastated, but yet oftentimes those small businesses, they serve as a neighborhood anchors. And especially in neighborhoods where there isn't a nonprofit, They know who's coming by. They know what's going on. They keep tabs. And I think one of the things that, we need to be mindful of as New Yorkers is we need to keep an eye on each other. We need to be able to support each other. What I think about when I saw the video, with the woman in Flushing getting knocked over, and there were people standing by. And then when I heard Noel's story when he was, he was hurt on the subway train, nobody helped him. And, that really shocks me. This is, I know New Yorkers are always seen as, we're the tough New Yorkers and we're indifferent. I don't think we're indifferent. I think we're actually very, I think my fellow New Yorkers are amazing people. And so it's really shocking to hear, and shocking to see where people turn the other way and, they're not offering to help. It's not about, bearing witness, but you've got to step up and be able to help your neighbors when they're falling down.
That's a tremendous call to action, Joanne. Jumani said, greet people as human beings, regardless of their background. And what you're saying is let's look out for each other and let's care about what happens to people either within or without our community. I think that's a tremendous message that would help a great deal. Reg, we're going to come to you and then we're going to close with Ron, the host and sponsor of the night. Reg, what would you like us to take away and what can we do?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to just sort of piggyback on what Joanne was saying is looking at the video and just in other instances where violence happens on the train, subway, public settings, there are a lot of people watching. And oftentimes when we're watching those videos, we shame people saying, hey, why didn't those people do anything? A lot of times when we hear from our participants, they say, I want to, I just don't know what to do. I don't want to get hurt. There's a lot of fear and anxiety. And also they just tangibly, they don't have any tools, right? So this is an opportunity. This is a particular time, a perfect opportunity for all of us to sign up for these classes, look, research stuff online. There's a lot of resources. These strategies are lifelong work, right? Just because you come to one workshop doesn't mean you're an expert, but we all have to make a commitment to start somewhere. So I promise you, as you live on your life, you're gonna see multiple incidents as a bystander, and it's up to you to become an upstander by preparing yourself with these strategies and tools. And so I really would encourage folks to either research on their own, go to our website, cany.org, and because we can't, like everyone said here, we can't rely on the police. They're not everywhere in our lives, right? And for other reasons. So I would encourage that. And thank you.
That's a lovely ask, Reg. It's so concrete. It's like essentially have an action plan and tools if something happens around you. Because if you have that plan, the odds of you taking action are 100 times higher than if you haven't really thought about what you do in that situation. I love it. Please do go to CAE's website, get yourself some tools, and then you'll be an upstander if this happens around you. Last but definitely not least, our host for tonight and sponsor, and someone who's really been fighting for our community for so long, Ron Kim. Take us home, Ron.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for lending your platform again. And Joanne, Reg, thank you for all that you do, and the Public Advocate for joining us in this platform today. I was in a conference a couple years ago with some indigenous leaders, and they were telling me within their language and how they greet each other, they actually ask whenever they see each other, do you have enough? That's how they greet each other. Do you have enough? Because there is enough around to give in their communities. That is the root of their foundation. It's a mindset of abundance that they live by. And I think at the core, we want to be nice, right? We want to tell people, be empathetic, be sympathetic. But when we have a state that has a $1.8 billion economy, the largest economy in the country, trillion economy. Thank you, Andrew. And it's the 10th largest economy compared to other nations in the world. Yet we have the worst social upward mobility in the state. We have a problem. So people are waking up every day and saying, I'm working my ass off, but I'm not going anywhere. So I am frustrated and I feel enraged. And that's why I feel so passionate about collaborating with Andrew on so many different outside the box solutions. Because people, at the end of the day, people want to come to New York and make the impossible happen. Like and that's what, and people are losing hope. Like I'm working hard, but I'm not getting anywhere. So I'm pissed off. Like I walk around like, you piss me off, you piss me off. That's how literally you could feel the tensions when you walk around the subway. So unless we figure out how to break through that and make people feel like your hard work will pay off again. And that's a big challenge, but I know that with you and Joanne and Jumani, like we'll get there. And I do feel optimistic. I do feel like we can get those policies done for the greatest city in the world. And Andrew, your personality is very, very addictive. You know, no matter how bad of a weekend I have, when I see you, I feel uplifted. I want to do some more positive work. So thank you for your continuous optimism, and let's do some positive work.
Thank you, Ron. You, Joanne, and Reg had the same effect on me and Jumani. You're all such activists and fighters for the greater good. It was a privilege to be here with you all, and let's do it. Let's make your words come true, Ron. We can think bigger and act bigger for New York City. We can get this load off of people so that they'll actually be able to react to each other, themselves, ourselves as human beings. We'll be able to share in that humanity, and not feel targeted because of our differences. Thank you all so much. It was wonderful being here with you. Let's get to work and thrilled to help hopefully our community get a better sense as to what we can do, as to what actions we can take to help ourselves become more resilient and put a stop to these incidents over time. Thank you all so much. Thank you all. That was awesome. Appreciate the heck out of you. Thank you, Ron, for making it happen.